Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, coming to you from my mother's basement, of course, in Brooklyn, New York. And, you know, I have a saying, which is we all make our choices in life, and I'm perfectly happy with mine. I'm perfectly happy with, the things I do for fun and for a career. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sitting here in this cell. I have time to dwell on it. But who is Steve? Steve Guntley?
It's me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm here too. Just real quick question. Have you been bathed in the blood of the Lord? Because we can talk about that. This is the podcast. It's all about talking heads, acid chicken, and of course, Sister Quigley. That's because this is the podcast about Trophy Heads, a fun throwback thriller that lets some of Full Moon's leading ladies poke a little fun at themselves. A real surprise of a movie, Trophy Heads. I'm very excited to get into it. This one really snuck up on me, and I cannot wait to get into it. And we have a very exciting guest joining us here today. Who is here with us today, Jared?
Well, you know, we would be remiss to not bring a Full Moon super fan on to the show for a movie like this, a celebration of all things Charles Band, which is really, I guess, what the show is in general. But this particular Full Moon superfan that we decided to bring on is the editor-in-chief of fthismovie.com and the host of the F This Movie podcast. He also co-authored the incredible In Search of Darkness coffee table book, which if you do not have the In Search of Darkness coffee table book, you need to have the book here because it is such a gorgeous piece of media. I'm talking, of course, about Patrick Bromley. Patrick, thank you for taking the time and joining us. And I hope you're as excited as we are to talk about Trophy Heads.
I'm super excited. I rarely find people in my day-to-day life who want to talk about Trophy Heads with me. So this is a rare opportunity, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, you came highly recommended. We did an episode about 6 months ago with your co-author of the In Search of Darkness book, Heather Wixon. And she said to us, I don't remember if it was on or off mic, but she essentially was like, okay, you got me. Now you got to get Patrick.
Yeah, she knows
this
about
is right up his alley.
Yeah. So, we used to attend Flashback Weekend in Chicago together every year, and there would always be many. I would just slowly be drawn to the Full Moon table, and she would have to stand with me as I rifled through all of their stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because like when she said that, I was like, that's amazing. It's amazing that he's a Full Moon super fan too. And, you know, as we've been doing the show, we've sort of established the nature of the show is that we're here to uncover and talk about all of these movies. We've read a lot about the company. We know a lot about the company, but our actual relationship with some of the titles themselves varies. Steve came in like having seen some, but not a ton. I had seen a little bit more than him, but still not comparatively, not a lot of them.
Yeah.
So when did your path, Patrick, start to becoming a Full Moon super fan? So like before we talk about Trophy Heads, like was Full Moon something you discovered young? Like where was that in your horror discovery?
Honestly, the original Puppet Master in 1989 was my first Full Moon movie because we used to have we had cable when I was a kid, and there was a channel devoted to the previews for what was going to be on pay-per-view, basically. And I would just sit and watch that channel on repeat, and I was exposed to so many different titles that way, just seeing previews for stuff that was going to be on pay-per-view. And I remember the original Puppet Master preview playing all the time. And I was like, what is this movie? I need to see this movie. So I got my mom to take me to the video store and rented the original Puppet Master probably shortly after it came out. So I've been pretty ride or die with Full Moon through the good years and the bad years, pretty much since it began.
Awesome.
Amazing. So you get to kind of chart the whole thing. Now, Trophy Heads in that regard might seem like a movie that's sort of built for someone like you, or someone who has been with the franchise the entire time, you know, and they make that argument in it came from the video aisle as well, that like you're probably going to get more from this movie if you've been locked in with this whole kind of fan community for a long time. Let me tell you, I watched it with my girlfriend, who does not have the same. She does not watch all these movies with me. She's popped in for maybe one or two.
She values her time.
She values her time more than I do. Her time has more value than mine does. But she was locked in. She's like, we were like 20 minutes into it, and she's like, this one's fucking great. Like she was having such a fun time with it. And that's kind of where I come down to. This movie was really not on my radar. I think we've both, maybe a little unfairly, but also just kind of based on the sample size that we have, we've kind of dismissed later period full moon movies. You know, like it's not exactly a fallow period. And I think by 2014, when this movie came out, they're sort of on the uptick and they're finding like kind of what their new voice is going to be. But coming off of that really rough patch in the early 2000s, it sort of felt like, you know, the dream was dead to a certain degree. And then we get a movie like this.
Well, this is one of those movies. I mean, we'll call it a movie for the sake of the podcast, but really this was a web series and it was released episodically. And I watched it the first time as a full-length, feature-length movie, and I watched it the second time as 5 separate episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed the flow of it, and I can totally understand somebody in 2014 being like, oh, you know, like Full Moon is going to do this web series, sort of, again, like maybe not kicking off a trend, but definitely being kind of on the front end of that trend. And like, yeah. I can 100% see somebody going to fullmoonhorror.com and like watching these as they drop and not knowing where it was going to go. And it is such a fun, rewarding meta concept for people. So that being said, the fact that this is Trophy Heads and you know, it is a meta movie. Steve, why don't you quickly just fire off some of the stats? Like who are we talking about in this movie?
Oh boy, we are talking about so many people. Trophy Heads was released June 4th, 2014. It was directed by Charles Band. It was written by Charles Band and Neil Marshall Stevens under the pseudonym Roger Barron. And it stars Adam Noble Roberts, Maria Olsen, Brink Stevens, Michelle Bauer, Jacqueline Lavelle, Denise Duff, Linnea Quigley, Darcy DeMoss, Irina Murphy, Carl Strickyan, and Stuart Gordon appears in this movie. Fucking amazing. Now, what a crazy fun idea, first of all, for a movie. But it should be said that this did not start, as you mentioned, it did not start as a movie. This was Full Moon's first web series. This was, you know, the early 2010s. People were starting to look at this as kind of the future. One more way that Charles Band was sort of ahead of the curve, you know, because now obviously we consume most of our media through Quibi. And I think he was really ahead of the curve on that. You know, he knew the quick bites that we would be consuming our media in from then on. But this is just such a fun idea and such a great way to bring back a lot of Full Moon favorites. The basic concept is that there's an obsessed basement-dwelling horror movie fan who decides to kidnap iconic scream queens from Full Moon and Empire history and force them to reenact their scenes before he kills them and mounts their heads on the wall, where the heads still have pretty lively social life and have long conversations with each other. This is a great chance to bring back some old favorites. First of all, there's friends of the show like Denise Duff and Brink Stevens, who we've had on. There's people who we want to have on in the future, like Michelle Bauer and Jacqueline Lavelle and Linnea Quigley. The only new name to our show so far is Darcy DeMoss. I did have to look her up because she's had relatively
you don't remember her face getting shoved into the side of the camper in Jason Lives?
Oh, that's
what
her.
I think of her.
That is her. That's right. I forgot that was her. In terms of like Full Moon movies, she's really only appeared in one that I can find, and that's Alien Abduction: Intimate Secrets, which is I think it's a Torchlight movie, if I'm not mistaken, or at least it's like Torchlight adjacent. It's kind of in that Famalian vein. Yeah, she doesn't make it too far into this movie, but she was fun to have. I liked seeing her. So this movie does have a bit of a fragmented tone because what we're watching is the web series that's been edited together into one 90-minute movie. So there is some kind of pacing issues here and there are some ebb and flow, but the real meat of this movie is just watching these scream queens get to kind of recapture some of their old glory in a little bit of a way, and also really poke fun at themselves and at the Hollywood system that is so dismissive of them, especially as they age. You know, this movie really takes some pointed jabs at the ageism in Hollywood, especially facing like genre actresses like this. And there's no reason this movie needed to be this smart and incisive. I really thought it was. Like, genuinely, this is Charles Band is ruminating here in a way that he doesn't usually allow himself to do. I think that the Adam Roberts character is a Charles Band stand-in. He is lamenting the loss of the old days. He's wondering if he can keep things going in the current days. And really, ultimately, he just wants to get his friends together so he could kill them in creative ways. You know, that's his love language for a lot of these women, you know, and it's very weirdly reflective of that way.
It is. It has really fun themes, and the concept, the conceit of the movie itself is a lot of fun. And I knew that going into it, but I hadn't actually watched it before the movie was recommended. So, Patrick, I have to first of all commend you for picking this, but I want to know, and Steve, I'm sure wants to know why. Like, I know, like, you know, we send you kind of an abbreviated list of like, here's stuff that's available, but this was one that you kind of singled out early on in our conversations, and you know, we didn't really go back and forth. It was like, all right, cool, like let's do it. You know, it's a newer one, but you picked it, so there must be something to it. So what's your relationship with this movie?
Yeah, I was so excited when this was available on the list of titles that you guys had offered, because I do think this is the gem of the last decade of Full Moon's output. Yeah. I watched this as a web series because I was an early adopter on Full Moon streaming back when that was something that Charles Band was launching. And this was one of their first kind of exclusive offerings that they were going to have this web series. And, you know, the first couple episodes are like, they're fun. It's fun to see Brink Stevens and Michelle Bauer again. And there's Linnea Quigley, and the Linnea Quigley segment gets pretty dark and like is genuinely trying to be scary. But I was like, okay, I get it. Each week we're going to get a Scream Queen, and then it's a little funny, but like we get to see them die at the end, and we're going to repeat this formula. And then it gets to the Denise Duff and Jacqueline Lavelle segment, and it becomes a whole different movie or a whole different show. And I was like, oh, this is inspired. This is really smart and really funny. And these two are great together. And so now when I watch it, because I've watched it as a movie a couple of times, I kind of love the tonal shifts that happen as a result of it being a web series, that it goes from being like this kind of dark horror thing, even though it's, you know, kind of self-reflexive and meta, into a really funny, self-aware commentary on Full Moon and, like you guys were saying, you know, acting in 2014 and what it means to be an actress aging in the genre. And I just, that the once Jacqueline Lavelle and Denise Duff show up, the whole thing comes alive for me in a way. Not that I didn't like the stuff before, but I was like, oh, this is really smart and really special.
Absolutely. No, I was exactly with you as well, you know, because it does have kind of a strange structure that seems to be, you know, part of it's the web series format, and part of it's probably just availability for these actresses who are very busy. But, you know, not all of them are sharing the screen at the same time at any real point, unless they're like severed heads. So it's like we're going through chronologically, like, you know, from the Scream Queens who were in the earliest movies up to the more current ones, you know. And I did feel a little bit of like some of the steam letting out as we were hitting like the midway point, you know. Weirdly, for me, it kind of started to slow down when they started going a little harder on the horror, you know, like when they're doing the kill sequence with Linnea and like getting into that. It's starting to feel a little bit more Saw, you know, which is throwing off kind of the fun, winky tone of the rest of it. But man, did they pivot really hard in that last act, because whoever thought to put Denise and Jacqueline together as kind of like an odd couple, bickering pairing, it was inspired. They are, no disrespect to any of the other actresses, but I think these are the two strongest actresses of like the Full Moon, like main canon.
Hey, Steve, it's an acting choice.
It's an acting choice. It's an acting choice. You know, and it's so fun, you know, having spoken with Denise Duff, who is very straightforward and confident and really like comfortable with her place in the world. And to see her playing this character here who is wildly insecure, you know, who's still like going out for roles for women in their like mid 30s, you know, when she's like beyond that, like she, you know, and just how kind of a raw nerve she is and how jealous of Jacqueline, who she is. Like, it's really great to see. It's such a performance and it's really great.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off that a little bit, Steve. Like, there's a bit of like, yeah, you have both Denise and Jacqueline auditioning for roles which their age is outside of the call for the character for the role.
Yeah.
But you know, there's someone who we haven't mentioned who has been done a disservice on our show because of the stuff we've covered so far, who sort of represents the changing of the guard in real time here, and that's Robin Sidney.
Yeah,
who I think is so fucking funny in the like 2 scenes that she's in this movie.
Yeah,
and her energy is amazing, and like I can't wait. Like, we've praised some of the like over the top choices that she's made in a couple things that we've watched with her in, where she's trying to counterbalance sort of like the dead fish of a movie that she's in.
Right. Yeah.
But here I feel like, you know, she's brings an energy that then reflects immediately sort of a contrast to what Denise and Jacqueline are bringing. But it's very brief, but I find it to be so funny, and I can't wait until we get to something where the energy of the project matches Robin Sidney's energy in a larger role. Because I feel like she's so funny in this, and she's so not in it for very long, but she has a laugh at herself, which I can appreciate.
She absolutely does, and it's such a pointed moment too. Like these actresses are competing for this role in Stuart Gordon's new film, and they're giving performances, and they're really trying. And then she comes in as like this ditzy, like millennial, like phone obsessed girl, can't even say the line right, but she gets the part, and she's all just like bubbly and silly, you know. And it's a broad gag, but it is also very pointed because it's how aging women are treated in the film industry. They are commodified, and they're always looking for the next hot young thing. And good on Stuart Gordon for coming in and being willing to play that kind of curmudgeonly old, like sleazy director role too. Like that was really funny. Yeah, I mean, truly, this was a great showcase because, you know, Jacqueline Lavelle, who we talked about fairly recently for the first time with Hideous. You know, we're both big fans of her. She only had 2 or 3 movies, I think 3, right? It's Head of the Family, Hideous, and Killer Eye are her 3.
She's in Killer. I was gonna say Femalian too.
Yeah,
I think there's at least 4, but not more than that, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a small handful, but she is kind of in a lot of ways, kind of the avatar of the Kushner-Locke era of Full Moon, you know, that really weird experimental sort of wilderness period where they're still making movies with Paramount ambitions, but without Paramount budget, you know, and things are going like pretty wildly off the rails in a fun and entertaining way. But she largely stepped away from the industry for a long time because she was being pigeonholed into kind of these sex pot roles, and she wanted to prove that she was more of an actress. And I'm watching her in this, and I'm like, her comic timing is impeccable. Like, she's actually giving a good, dedicated, funny, warm performance and has complete awareness of how she plays on screen. And I thought it was like an exceptional performance from Jacqueline.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I've had that every time I've seen her in something, and I haven't seen Killer Eye, but I remember seeing Hideous and Head of the Family for the first time. And it was like, and I'm not comparing them because they look alike, but the first time I saw The Mask with Jim Carrey when Cameron Diaz comes on screen, it's like, who is that? And Jacqueline Lavelle has that same kind of star quality and amazing comic timing that, you know, is sort of at odds with her physical appearance. You don't expect somebody who looks like her to be as funny as she is because we've been conditioned to be like, these people are like this. I think she's terrific in everything she's in. So to see her come back to do this role in Trophy Heads and to be as funny as she is and to have this amazing chemistry. And then you get Michelle Bauer in the middle, just constantly rolling her eyes and trying to mitigate the fight between them. The chemistry between the 3 actors is so funny.
Yeah, it genuinely is. You know, I'm an actor in my free time as well, and I've really come to appreciate actors who can seem just at home and comfortable and confident. And that's something that Jacqueline Lavelle brings to the table. Like, you can criticize line readings, you can criticize dialogue, you can criticize all of that, but she feels at home on screen in a way that like it really translates. Like, a handful of actors can do that and just seem really comfortable and like will bring you along for it. And it's kind of an innate skill, you know, if you're not like naturally comfortable on screen, you're not naturally comfortable, but she really is. And I think that goes a long way.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and that's not to discount the performances of the earlier Scream Queens as well, because I think all of them are having so much fun. The decision to make Linnea Quigley a born-again evangelist going door to door renouncing her sinful ways is so funny. Now, we haven't met Linnea. We don't know about her like personal beliefs or anything like that, but it's just playing off of her persona. As Linnea is always the woman who gets cast as kind of like the down and dirty girl, you know, like she's sexy, but she's got a little bit of a mean girl edge, and she's always kind of willing to show a little skin and have a little fun and like get covered in gore, you know. So it's really funny to be playing off of our perceptions of her by making her this religious character.
And I don't know why it tickled me so much, but I just got a kick out of her being dressed in her Creepazoids fatigues.
Yes. Yeah. Now, so the kind of core concept of this movie, I do have some nitpicks about that a little bit, because we're in this kind of weird place. And again, this sort of further emphasizes that the main character is a Charles Band avatar, because the idea here is that he's kidnapping these Scream Queens and forcing them to recreate iconic moments from these movies that they've been in, but they don't actually resemble the movies at all. For whatever reason, maybe it was like time, they didn't have time to fully recreate it, or they just didn't have the energy or the budget or whatever, but they kind of hand wave it away by saying, I'm making my own version. I'm making a more artistic version. I think you would have made a funnier point if you tried to stick closely to the scenes themselves and to have the actresses like giving line readings like they did back in the 80s or 90s. I think that would have made for a stronger final product. But again, Charles Band pivots, you know, he works with what he has. He goes in and he with an idea, and as things go along, he changes it. And that's kind of what this character is doing as well. I will say, you know, the Scream Queens are going to get a lot of attention on this episode, but the two kind of killer characters at the center of it are really striking and really interesting. Adam Roberts, I was looking him up. He's really only been in this and two later Evil Bong movies, but I thought he had real presence and real like menace. And then Maria Olsen, who plays his mother, has something like 300 film credits going back to the 80s. Like, she works constantly, but man, there is nobody else that looks like her or has that particular oddball energy that she brings to this. She doesn't even look like she's that much older than the boy playing her son, which makes it feel all the more surreal. But she's really great, and it's a really great twist that she's sort of in on this, like as an enabler. Yeah,
there's like a real weird perverted sweetness. To their relationship. But it's right. Like we've often lamented in a lot of these movies where there'll be someone like a Denise Duff or like any of these Scream Queens, like a Jacqueline Lavelle or someone who will give a really committed performance, but we often find a lot of the male leads in these movies to be bland or forgettable. And I don't find that to be the case here. I think he's pretty good and Mom's good. Like I definitely was kind of into it right from the beginning. And I will say, just to, you know, my ever-growing crush on Elizabeth Caton, as we've been doing this show, they do pause Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity on her, and I kind of crossed my fingers and went to IMDb like, wait a second, is she uncredited and in this movie? No, she's not, unfortunately, but
unfortunately, I think she might have gone kind of the MAGA route, and it doesn't really associate with folks much anymore. I know she was kind of working with some conservative politicians in the official capacity, so I don't know. I don't want to slander. Yeah, I believe so. No, I don't mean to slander, but
I think you're thinking of Charlie Spradling.
Her too. Yeah,
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think it might be both. But I could be wrong about that. But I think that's what I read. So I mean, but the movies that they select to recreate, it's kind of a fun selection. We go with Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity. We go with Sorority Babes and the Slimeball Bolorama. We go with Creepazoid. Alien Abduction, Intimate Secrets, Subspecies 2, and Head of the Family. That's kind of the route that we're working through, more or less. Well, not really chronologically, because they start with Darcy DeMoss. So those are kind of the movies that they're sampling from. And I think that's a pretty good cross section, because some of them feature multiple, like Michelle Bauer and Brink are both in Slave Girls and in Sorority Babes, and a few others. And so it's a good cross section. It gives plenty of opportunities to poke fun at some of these older movies as well. I did love the scene where Jacqueline is trying to defend her role in Head of the Family and like trying to say is a little more artful, and then they cut to the shot of the tongue, the long tongue, like licking her nipple, and Denise is just like, well, maybe I just need more evidence. I don't know. Like, they're really having a good time, like poking fun at themselves.
I mean,
what is like Michelle doing at the beginning? She's like a beachside like tarot card reader and massage therapist.
She's selling like smoothies.
Oh,
David
smoothies. That's it. Yeah.
David Dakota, who counts out his change, which is a great joke about the cheap budgets of Dave Dakota movies.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's
I
great.
like too that in addition to being this this sort of meta commentary on a lot of these actresses, like I feel a little bit indicted as a fan of Full Moon in a good way, like because I write this semi-regular column on my website called Full Moon Fever, and I feel like anytime I write a more contemporary review, I have to say like, well, it's not Empire, well, the Paramount years are behind us, and this idea that like we as fans are clinging to the past. We're clinging to something that is behind us. We're clinging to physical media. We're clinging to all of these things. All of that is there in that first kind of monologue that the Adam Roberts character gives. And it's like, I'm not an incel living in my mom's basement. I'm not going to, murder the actors that I love. And yet I'm watching this and I'm like, I feel a little bit seen. And I don't know if that's a good thing.
We all had that experience.
I think I do multiple podcasts that kind of deal in the realm of nostalgia to one degree or another. We're looking back at old video games or old movies or things like that. And I really like to challenge nostalgia as much as possible. And I think that's what you should do as a fan of things. Don't just like something forever because you liked it when at a formative time in your life. So I think it's fair game, and it's all like, I think it's all in good fun, and it's all spirited. And I think it's a fertile topic because as we delve deep, this movie's 2014 and we're well into the internet age, but we haven't quite reached the vitriol of like the Trump era of weaponizing information or false information, or using the internet as this platform to kind of aggrandize yourself when you are this kind of basement dwelling, sort of backwards thinking loser, so I feel like the satire is pointed, and I think it's appropriate. And obviously you're never going to want to think like, oh, I'm watching this movie about a terrible nerd who's just obsessed with things, and there's no redeeming values to this person. But I think, most of us can reflect a little bit and say like, yeah, no, that's not me, and maybe you can reflect on it and say, oh shit, that is me. I need to pare it back a little bit. I don't know.
Maybe he should have just started a podcast.
It's a healthy outlet. It's a healthy outlet. And how else are you going to get a chance to watch every Evil Bong movie?
Oh boy.
Yeah, we're still dreading that one.
But I will say, like, this movie, I had a lot of goodwill towards it kind of from frame one when I saw where it was going, what it was doing. And the introductory scene of the movie, I do remember actually my first instinct was like, wow, this looks really cheap. And then I realized that, besides the fact that it is cheap because it's a 2014 Full Moon web series, but it's also them filming a scene of Darcy DeMoss.
Yeah.
So it kind of was, I was able to get over kind of how it first looked in the very beginning of the setup. Once we get to the basement set and all that stuff, I was on board with it.
Yeah.
And the performances were engaging. But I was going to say, like, this movie really, my goodwill never dissipated because in addition to having, Denise Duff being the Felix to Jacqueline Lavelle's Oscar, we do get to see some footage of Head of the Family and Subspecies 2, which are always welcome for me as two of my favorite full moon movies. And I'm like, I'm enjoying myself, but I don't mind that they're cutting in some footage from these movies because that's a nice welcome addition. And I do like also that there's within Denise and Jacqueline's conversation is kind of talk about like, well, what's legitimate and what's not. Like Denise holds herself as being like a true artist, an actor with artistic ambition.
Right.
Whereas like to her, Jacqueline Lavelle is just like in these movies, like she even says it herself, it's like boobs and blood, is really what they want. But then she brings up like soap opera acting, which is a whole other component, a whole other thing, style of acting where it's like you get new scripts every daily
day,
almost or weekly.
Yeah,
with
you do 5 shows a week. Yeah,
things changed around and you need to be able to adapt. And we've had just talking to people who are either have been on the show or tangentially related to the show, Denise Duff, Barbara Crampton, other people who spent a lot of time soap opera acting also.
Yeah.
And it's like that was a funny thing too, because Jacqueline Lavelle kind of comes says something sarcastic like, well, I'm sorry it's not Days of Our Lives or something like that.
Right.
And it was really fun to see the two of them hash out the different approaches to acting when really they're kind of doing the same thing, which is like what this movie is saying. It's like under the umbrella of Full Moon, you've got this gothic vampire movie and you've got this fucking batshit giant head movie, and they're equal in a lot of ways. They're equal in my book.
And again, like, breaking out the actor card again, but like the soap opera acting and B movie acting are kind of on a level with each other, and they're both pretty hard to break out of, because once you start doing soap operas or these B movies, people are going to see these and just assume this is your level, so the people who break out of that cycle are either they demonstrate some kind of inordinate talent in another project, or they develop their own projects, and kind of recast themselves as these new people or these new performers. So it's a sort of lucrative prison if you get kind of caught up in the soap opera world. You'll probably be steadily employed for 15 to 30 years, but you also are going to kind of sacrifice a lot of your career for that, because it's just kind of the level that people assume that you're going to be stuck at.
And Kevin Spiritus. He spent a lot of time on soap operas as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see a lot of crossover between the soap opera and the horror world, because they're kind of both of similarly ill repute, whether that's warranted or not.
So I have a question for you guys.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Please.
Go ahead. I have a question. I'm not trying to take shots at anything else that Full Moon has done, like in the last decade, but having done Trophy Heads, I feel like it throws a lot of the rest of their later output into sharper relief, because it's like, you're capable of this. Why are you not always shooting for this? Like, again, the production values are not sky high.
No,
I get that they can't always assemble a cast like this. Obviously, this was a special thing, but the material is good. And why are we not trying to always have the best possible material?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what you guys think about why aren't more recent Full Moon movies as good as Trophy Heads?
It's true, and we haven't, in the scope of things, we haven't covered that many of the more recent, like in the last 10 years, movies. We've covered like Piranha Women and Sorority Babes 2, a handful of other little things, but I feel like a big problem with Full Moon in post 2000 is that so much of their output got dominated by these kind of like Spencer Gifts sort of humor horror, like lots of Evil Bong, lots of Ginger Dead Men, lots of Killjoy, lots of kind of Full Moon has always been about their mascots and their tiny terrors, and I think those kind of became the de facto for the new ones, and they just don't really connect the way that the older ones did.
I feel like you are purposely trying to scrub the Ginger Weed Man from memory.
I genuinely did memory hole that already. Yeah, the Ginger Weed Man belongs in that category fully, and he is a terrible man. He's a terrible, terrible man.
Yeah, I think like Sorority Babes 2 was a nice surprise in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It was a nice it paid homage well to the original, but did some things on its own, and we had a really fun time chatting with Brink Stevens about making that movie, about what that meant to her and all that stuff. And so we had a lot of goodwill coming into that one, more so maybe than we did for Ouija's or Ginger Weed Man or one of those, or and some of the Evil Bong stuff. But it's a really it's an interesting thing, because I see Full Moon, it always looks like they do fall back on this kind of mascot horror movies in some ways, because again, I proposed this question, I've never found out an answer yet, which is I really wonder if those things sell well, conventions and stuff like that. Do Gingies and EBs, figurines of those movies, of those characters, do they sell a lot at the Full Moon tables at conventions? Like, I don't know. They must, for them to keep going back to that well. But I will say, I'm pretty excited to dig into a couple of things. One is we'll be getting to the Primevals very soon.
Yeah.
And I'm also super excited to get into some of this pulp noir stuff.
Yeah, that's an exciting new initiative. I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I feel like some of the earliest ones, like Quadrant, are already out there. And so I don't know, Steve, like we may need to like do some of these and slot some of these in earlier to kind of see where Full Moon's operating right now, because
for sure, yeah,
it has been diminishing returns on some of the newer ones.
We have a show master spreadsheet. I recently updated it with a couple of the movies that have come out since we first established the show, so like Quadrant and Amy the Visitor and things like that we haven't really gotten to. And I'd be curious, because some of the stuff they're doing now looks like they're moving away from what this movie so eloquently summarizes as blood, tits, and little monsters. They're moving away from that a little bit to be a little bit winkier. They're making a Barbenheimer movie right now that Ted Nicolau is working on. There's things like bad CGI Gator, where they're kind of just owning a little bit of what's going on here, and like the joke of it is that they're being attacked not by a gator but by a CGI gator. Like they're having a little bit of fun with that, and they're expanding a touch, and I think they're opening it up to some interesting new talent. But it's a testament that like this is still going. Full Moon is still going. This is a fairly recent movie, and there's been dozens of movies since this one came out. They're still trying stuff. They're still letting stuff stick to the wall or not. But I am with you. It is a little frustrating when you see a movie like this and you see like, okay, they had this in them. They had this, like everything was kind of clicking, and it really felt like they gave a shit here in a way that some of the other movies of this era maybe haven't had that same kind of passion to it. But hey, the fun thing about Charles Band is that you can never really count him out, and you can never really anticipate where he's going. Like his career has had dozens of starts and stops, and sometimes complete failures, and then he'll bounce back and buy 30 mansions. Like he's got this wild life and this wild career, and he doesn't seem to have the words no or quit in his vocabulary. So somebody like that is always going to produce something interesting and weird, and he's always going to surprise you. So, we may be on in the works for a third or fourth or fifth Full Moon renaissance, depending on how you categorize it.
Yeah, and I think like it's like I'm not sure what the grand ambitions are for where the company is going now, but they're clearly trying to go like a darker, more serious route, at least within all of this pulp noir stuff.
Yeah,
and like I'm very interested to see, because if the point of this isn't to just revive these existing franchises, and it's to do all of these new movies a little bit darker, a little more serious in tone, obviously they're not going to be ever working with the same budget, because these have always been low budget movies. But I mean, nobody really in the low budget movie industry today works with the budgets that 80s Empire worked with.
Yeah.
Like they were low budget movies, but now we're talking about people are making micro budget movies now and make them look like professional productions more than you used to be able to. So in terms of budget money behind something, you're not going to have that kind of repeat, but who knows, maybe you have another sort of like Empire where these kind of minor cult classics, come out. I know they're putting, it's always like they always have this thing set up where it's like we're going to try to put out like a movie a month or something like that, some insane timetable that they're working within. But I'm excited to see that, and I did want to bring that up at some point on this episode. So I'm glad you asked that question, Patrick, because I wasn't entirely sure when the time was going to come up to bring that up. But I was like, I feel like when I say new full moon, I'm going to say like everything post like streaming era. So maybe everything from 2010 on. I don't have a ton of experience with a lot of that stuff. It's like trophy heads like we're talking about now. Ouija's, Ginger Weed Man, like Ginger Dead Man 2, and one or two other newer ones, but I mean that's just a fraction of the output. And so, I'm sort of worried that maybe this is signaling really diminishing returns, but
yeah, we
shall see.
We shall see. Either way, Trophy Heads is a huge recommend, I think, for all of us. Especially if this is just not on your radar, it absolutely should be. And it just gives me a little hope that the movies that we're going to cut, this is this later period of full moon that we're always a little reluctant to kind of dive into. And this just gives me a little hope that there might be some other gems out there that we can discover. I was just enormously entertained by this. And I think you don't need to come to this with 25 years of Empire and full moon knowledge to get a kick out of what they're doing here.
It helps. I mean, I was watching it, and when Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity was on, before they named the movie, I was sort of like it was on for 2 seconds, and I'm like, "Ooh, Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity!"
Yeah,
and I was very proud of myself until then. Brink Stevens goes, "It's Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity," and I was like, "Ah."
I had that same moment too. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I think I know that movie."
Yeah, and it was like, Linnea wearing her, like I said, fatigues from Creepazoids.
I didn't clock Creepazoids, I think, because whatever reason that movie didn't really stick in my brain. We covered it for another podcast show, and I don't know, a lot of the specifics of that movie just kind of left my brain entirely, or I conflated it with a lot of other movies that also seem to be shot in an old, like, abandoned working shed. But but that was the only one that I didn't really pop.
Yeah.
And of course, Alien Invasion I have not seen, but
well, that's it. I was glad that they point that one out, because there's a quick cut to Darcy DeMoss in a movie, and I went, "Well, I don't know that one." And then, sure enough, as if she's hearing me, Brink Stevens or someone is like, "Oh, that's Alien Abduction," and I'm like, "Cool,
cool, appreciate it. Thanks, Brink." Yeah,
jot that down. No, that aspect of it was a lot of fun. But one person we haven't mentioned so far in our discussion, who I think is a lot of fun in this movie too, is Irina Murphy.
Yeah,
who is sort of like the Avatar for a little while, who's just sitting in this, and it's the way she's treated is really funny. It's like, who is she? It's like, oh, she's my client. It's like, why is she naked?
Yeah. You got to give her props for just agreeing to kind of sit around this whole movie just completely nude. It's not an easy task to ask of somebody, but I thought she was funny and she was very game to do what she was doing, and we get a lot of like Jean Louise Sullivan and Jessica Morris, people who had appeared in other like later period full moon movies that are again getting a chance to, they're being positioned a little bit as like, this is the next crop. These are the next like future scream queens, but they're also still dealing with the same bullshit that all of them are having to deal with, of the sexism or not being treated seriously as an actress, or being dismissed because they're young and they're not like as bubbly and dumb as Rodney Sidney's character is, so it's hitting it across the whole spectrum in a way that I was really not expecting and was very happy with.
Yeah, and I just to go back to Irina Murphy for a second. I mean, she seems to have worked primarily a lot in the LA comedy scene.
Yeah.
And I think that shows. I think she has good comedic timing, and her line readings are pretty funny.
Yeah, she's
And
sharp.
she seems down for what they're doing to her in the movie, which is
She
just to
has
sort of absorb the information.
She has that really funny run where she's asking about if she runs full speed into the bars, would it knock her unconscious just so she can stop listening to Michelle Bauer? I thought that was very great.
Yeah, that was very funny. Yeah. No, I mean, I had a great time with this movie. I think this is a real hidden gem that folks should check out. It's on the Full Moon streaming app. It's on Tubi, I believe. You can track it down. But if you have any kind of affection for this era or for this company or just for B-movie scream queens that kind of get overlooked, this is a real showcase for all of them.
Yeah, all the callbacks and fan service was really welcome here, more so than Alien Romulus. Sorry, I had to get topical for a second.
Yeah, you had to throw that one out there. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, by the time this episode comes out, the movie won't even be in theaters anymore. So
yeah, everyone will have seen it already. Yeah. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being here and for bringing this movie to our attention. We really appreciate it. Do you have anything to promote or anything you'd like to direct people towards that you're working on?
I write for fthismovie.com, and we publish new podcasts every Wednesday at fthismovie.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Amazing.
Okay, so Patrick, I want to ask you, and I'll send this question to Steve also.
Okay.
This is not something we've really done before, but you are essentially, we've talked about how we saw a little bit of ourselves in the lead of this movie, in the Max character. So you're Max, you're collecting these trophy heads of these scream queens, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got Darcy DeMoss, you've got Brink Stevens, you've got Linnea, you've got Jacqueline, you've got Denise, you've got Michelle Bauer. Who would be, if this continued, who would be your next severed head scream queen that you would abduct, and what movie of theirs would you try to recreate?
I can't. I feel so bad answering this question because I have so much respect for my answer, but I feel like I have to go back to the Empire days and abduct Barbara Crampton, who is the nicest person on earth. And I'm so sorry that I'm talking about cutting her head off and mounting it to my wall. But
I feel like she'd appreciate it.
Maybe.
It's a badge of honor.
I won't say Reanimator because I'll end up in jail. So I will say From Beyond.
Yeah. I mean, she's so fantastic and From Beyond, and it's so funny. And so, yeah, I don't know who mine would be. Trying to think of kind of more current screen queen, like Micah Monroe might be up there, but I don't know what scene I would want to recreate, like from It Follows or anything like that. Or, like either way, I think we can think of the trophy heads in this case, not necessarily as, think of it as kind of like a really grotesque Mount Rushmore. It's not necessarily about forcing them to reenact the scenes. It's more about canonizing them in this bizarre and grotesque way that I think a lot of horror heads would actually kind of appreciate.
Yeah, I was trying to think if there was someone else who immediately came to mind, and it's like obviously Barbara Crampton. And Barbara, if you're listening, sorry that you've been suggested for this. We wish you no bodily
nothing
harm.
But love. Nothing but love.
But I do feel like there are some. We're talking like B movie ones here. I would go with Amy Steele.
Oh, good choice. Yeah.
And then what I would do is I would stage it so at the whole thing at the very end, she realizes she was never actually in any harm and it was all a big joke.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Yeah, that's probably what I would do. Patrick, I do have one thing that I also want to know while we have you here. So I'm holding the In Search of Darkness book, which was co-authored by you and Heather Wixon, based off of David Weiner's documentary series, of which there are 3 parts. And so there's a lot of movie exploration in those 3 documentaries. I mean, I genuinely, I can't wait for the 90s ones to come out. The 80s ones are amazing. When they were all on Shudder, I would sometimes put them on as background noise.
Mm-hmm.
And the coffee table book, I mean, I'm very highly suggestible. So if you have a nice shiny coffee table book of something I'm interested in, like just shut up and take my money. Like,
Yeah.
it's my one major vice. But I do want to know, because there are certain movies in here where there's multiple pages devoted to beautiful photographs, really gorgeously laid out book, and not spend too much time on this, but I am curious, like, what went into sort of, how did you whittle down what was going to be covered in the book? Because it's not every movie that's in all three of the documentaries. It kind of, it goes by year. I don't think it's all of the movies, but it's a solid list. Is it all of them?
I believe, and I could be wrong, but it's not a very romantic answer. The book covers the first two documentaries.
Okay.
So the third one is not covered, I think, because I don't totally know. Heather could speak to that more intelligently than I could, but I believe it's just the first two. So we were honestly kind of handed a list of, here's the movies that you guys are going to cover. I would love to continue and do another one or do a 90s one and have a little bit more say, even though it is kind of nice to just be told, like, here's what you're writing about. But because there are certainly movies that I would love to have seen covered in there. I haven't heard anything about any follow-ups yet, but yeah, I think it's just the first two documentaries.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that makes sense, because when I think back to In Search of Darkness 3, they get pretty obscure in that one, which is to its betterment, because I do think, like, sure, we do need, when we talk about movies in 1980, we need to spend some time on Friday the 13th. But it's like, I think it's in Search of Darkness 2, maybe, it talks about humanoids from the deep. And I'm like, that's always like a 1980 movie that I would much rather. I feel like I know everything there is to know about Friday the 13th already.
Yeah.
It's well
so it's kind
covered.
of like some of those ones that they hit in Search of Darkness 3. But yeah, no, I'm not being paid to say any of this. It is an absolutely gorgeous book. I love the fact that I have it. And if you're a fan of this show and you're a fan of horror movies in general, and if you've seen those documentaries, like, this is the perfect companion piece. So definitely look into seeing if the book is still available and trying to grab a copy of it. It's definitely worth it. And if you are a fan of our show, in addition to being a fan of horror movies, you can jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a little 5-star rating, maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. If you want to keep up. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I'd interrupt. You could also send us a letter like Mike G did this month. You guys send a letter to puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. This letter by Mike G, it says, another great episode, guys. Congrats on getting Michael Gingold. Of course, they're talking about our Cinderella Fairy Tales episode. For what it's worth, I enjoy the fairy tale movies more than the Cinderella one. The extra
hot take,
like the doorman, the Baron's sidekick, and that shady messenger dude add some wonderful humor. That S&M dance number is awesome and maybe influenced Mel Brooks' Inquisition number in History of the World, ? Keep up the good work, gentlemen. I look forward to your show each week. So thank you, Mike, for sending that in. People can always send in those letters. Sorry to interrupt. I just
no, that's amazing. We've had a couple of these letters from time to time. I would love for it to become a more constant segment of the show. So please, puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. Write into us with anything you want to say to us, comments, questions, corrections, anything like that. We're receptive to all criticism. Just try, please, to keep it constructive is all I ask. But anyway, yeah, if you want to keep up with the show, you can jump onto Instagram, puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We also post about the show on X. Probably we'll get back to Threads and Blue Sky soon. And there are audio versions of the show available on YouTube. I know that is the way a number of people consume it. So we will try to beef that YouTube channel up and get some more, not just audio of the show related content. But, you know, that takes some work. And we're not the only show that Steve has to worry about plugging and promoting. Steve, what else have you got going on?
Oh, so much worry. I need to I'm also the host of the show Cinema Arcade. That's cinema and arcade mashed together, because that is what we are doing. We are watching movies and then playing the video games based on those movies. So I know I'm doing a double header recording tomorrow where I'm going to do an episode on Friday the 13th and The Fifth Element. So 2 very interesting, very different films that we're going to be talking about. And then we've got some other, we've got our Halloween. Actually, when you're hearing this, the Halloween month just ended, but we do a whole month of horror movies. And we just have a lot of fun stuff coming up there. So definitely check that out whenever you can. And be sure to check us out next week because we have a fun little genre mashup. We're revisiting not just one series, but 2 different series at the same time because we're going to be talking about 1993's Doll Man versus Demonic Toys. And actually, technically 3 because there's a character from Bad Channels that made it into that one too. So that's one of the few remaining like classic era full moon films that we have not covered. It'll be great to revisit Tim Thomerson and the old Demonic Toys and see how see if those can enhance each other in an interesting way.
Absolutely, and we have an outstanding return guest coming back for that episode too. So it's going to be a blast. I mean, we really, I personally love Doll Man. I've come around on Demonic Toys as time has passed since our initial recording on that episode. The movie has grown a bit in my estimation, and I've warmed on it. So very excited to see where the adventures of Brick Bardo and these little tiny terrors go from here. So make sure that you join us next week for Doll Man versus Demonic Toys. See you next time.